Rising defiantly above the quiet Polish town of Świebodzin, with arms outstretched in eternal benediction, stands a monument that has baffled engineers, stirred religious devotion, sparked heated debate, and captured the imagination of millions across the globe, the colossal Christ the King statue, an awe-inspiring, sky-piercing figure of Jesus Christ that took nearly a decade to complete and now towers over the landscape like a stone sentinel watching over the world below. Yet what makes this statue truly astonishing is not just its height, though at 172 feet including its mound and crown. It once held the title of the tallest statue of Jesus in the world, but the story of its creation, a story not of government mandates or corporate funding, but of a single parish priest's relentless vision, a rural community's unwavering commitment, and a construction process so fraught with controversy, logistical headaches, and sheer improbability that it borders on the miraculous. And to understand why it took 9 long years to bring this divine colossus to life, you must return to the early 2000s, when a humble yet determined Catholic priest named Father Sylwester Zawadzki first envisioned erecting a statue so grand, so monumental in its scale, that it would not only pay homage to the faith of his people, but also put his obscure little town on the map as a global pilgrimage site. It was, to many, a ludicrous idea. Świebodzin was no Rio de Janeiro, and Poland, though deeply religious, had never hosted anything of such staggering ambition in terms of religious sculpture, but Zawadzki was undeterred, propelled by what he claimed was divine inspiration, a calling not just to preach from the pulpit, but to etch his devotion into the sky itself. At first, the project was met with polite amusement and skepticism, for how could a statue of this magnitude be funded, engineered, and assembled in a town with fewer than 22,000 residents? But Father Zawadzki, with the zeal of a man on a mission from God, began rallying his congregation, collecting donations from parishioners, securing land on the edge of town, and coordinating with engineers who had never tackled anything quite like this before. The design itself was both majestic and daring. Jesus Christ would be depicted standing tall in a robe, arms spread wide, with a golden crown atop his head symbolizing his role as King of the universe. And while it borrowed some visual inspiration from the iconic Christ the Redeemer statue in Brazil, it would surpass it in total height by carefully calculating every inch of the mound, pedestal, and crown to ensure superiority, a symbolic triumph that resonated deeply in a country that had endured occupation, war, and communism, and which now, in the post-Soviet era, sought to reaffirm its cultural and spiritual identity through grand gestures of resilience and faith. But as construction slowly began in 2001, challenges emerged at every turn: funding delays, material shortages, zoning debates, opposition from secular critics and urban planners, and even engineering dilemmas, as the weight and balance of such a massive structure had to be meticulously calculated to avoid catastrophe in Poland's unpredictable climate. And yet through it all, Father Zawadzki pressed forward, his resolve unshaken, his sermons filled with fiery conviction, often reminding his flock that if God wills it, it will stand. And stand it did, but not easily, not quickly, and not without moments of crisis, for as the years passed and the statue slowly took shape, from its reinforced concrete base to its massive steel frame, the scale of the endeavor became more apparent, especially during the hoisting of the arms and head, which had to be lifted by cranes so large they were imported from Germany, and even then, timing was everything, as wind gusts and temperature shifts could make the difference between a successful installment and structural disaster. There were tense days when the wind wouldn't let up and workers waited, suspended in time and prayer, for the perfect stillness to align with the availability of the cranes. And then there were moments of near failure, when one of the massive limbs nearly broke loose mid-air, sending gasps through the gathered crowd below, only to be stabilized at the last second as if by divine intervention. And slowly, over months and years, the figure of Christ emerged, foot by foot, until finally, on November 6, 2010, the final piece was affixed, the golden crown, glinting in the sun like a halo forged from fire and light, and the statue was declared complete, a towering beacon of faith. 33 meters tall to match the age of Jesus at his crucifixion, standing atop a 16-meter mound with a 3-meter crown, elevating it to the highest possible stature both literally and symbolically, so that now, when you enter Świebodzin, it is impossible to ignore the presence of Christ the King, whose gaze seems to reach beyond the horizon, whose arms seem ready to embrace the entire earth. And as the dust settled around the newly completed statue, as the final bolts were checked and the scaffolding taken down, it was clear to everyone watching that this was not just a monument, it was a statement, one carved into the Polish sky with defiant clarity, a testament to faith, perseverance, and one man's refusal to be told that his dream was too big, too unrealistic, or too audacious for a town like Świebodzin. And while critics continued to debate its aesthetics, its cost, and even its theological implications, The people of the town knew what it truly represented, not just Jesus, but themselves, their struggle, their unity, their long history of surviving through occupation, war, suppression, and now reinvention, because for a town once defined by anonymity, now international eyes were watching, cameras were rolling, and tourists were arriving, some out of pious devotion, others simply curious to see the world's tallest Jesus up close, and this influx of attention transformed not only the perception of Swiebodzin but also its economy, as hotels opened, cafes sprouted, souvenir shops began selling miniature versions of the statue, and locals who had once doubted the project now spoke of it with a pride that bordered on reverence. And yet, for all its grandeur, Christ the King remains more than a tourist attraction. It's a symbol of quiet resistance, a spiritual landmark born not from wealth or political decree but from grassroots devotion, from the deep and often invisible strength of a rural parish that dared to lift its voice to the heavens and say, "We are here." But the journey from idea to icon was far from smooth, and if one looks beneath the gleaming white surface of the statue, beneath the poured concrete and shimmering gold leaf, one finds a story filled with human vulnerability, logistical puzzles, and unexpected drama that played out like a modern biblical epic, because while the finished monument now stands serene, its creation was anything but peaceful, from disputes with city planners who warned that the statue might ruin the town's visual harmony, to arguments with engineers over the sheer complexity of lifting 30-ton limbs into place without them cracking under their own weight, to the delicate balancing act of raising funds without turning the church into a corporate venture, and to Father Zawadzki's own mounting health concerns as the years wore on, because this project was not just his dream, it became his life, and the toll it took on his body was visible to those close to him, who described him as increasingly frail but spiritually on fire, driven by something far beyond earthly ambition. And when asked why he pushed so hard for so long, why he didn't retire and leave the project unfinished, he would simply say, "Because it is not my will, but his," and in that simple statement lay the unshakable faith that had carried him, and the town, through years of doubt and near defeat. And it's precisely this human drama that adds such depth to the Christ the King statue's legacy, because behind every meter of its height lies a story of someone who gave something, whether it was their money, their time, their engineering expertise, their manual labor, or their prayers. And while the world may marvel at the final product, only the people of Swiebodzin truly understand the cost of its creation, the nights spent poring over blueprints, the weeks of waiting for parts to be delivered from factories that didn't even exist when the project began. The way seasons passed with only minor visible progress, testing the patience of a community that could have easily given up but didn't, and perhaps that is the most powerful element of this monument, not its concrete mass, not its symbolic height, but its soul, a soul forged in the fire of shared effort, of quiet determination, of an entire town putting its collective faith into something that had no guaranteed outcome, something so ambitious it bordered on absurdity, and yet now, over a decade after its completion, the statue stands unshaken, unweathered, a permanent presence on the Polish skyline and in the hearts of those who walk beneath it, pray before it, and tell their children that once, when everyone said it couldn't be done, they proved the world wrong.